Hello again, this is UML Operator. All right, welcome back. In our last session, we were talking about Business Process Modeling Notation 1, which included 1.0 and 1.1. In this session, we're going to focus on BPMN 2. All right, so I look forward to get into it. We're going to be going through a comparison between the various implementations, showing the progress to BPMN2 as we move across the various elements that are available to you for use in your BPMN or business process modeling. So let's go ahead and launch our working set for this session. We're going to go through each one of these models and we're going to talk about the Business Process Execution Language Engine, which compiles and runs your BPMN models. And we're going to talk about the resources, the people, or I want to say roles, because this could be one person, each one of these actors, or they could be individual actors in your project delivering your business process models. But first, let's step through each one of the categories or classes of elements in the toolbar to use for your business process modeling. So the first one we're going to start with is pools and lanes. Not much changed with the look and feel of pools and lanes between 1.0 and 2.0, but when you look at the properties, like for instance, in 1.0 and we go to 1.1, memo field was added and pool packaged, let's go here, was added, and ID, as I spoke about in the other session, was transitioned, or I want to say moved. When you go to 2.0, there was multiplicity added and other properties that were added for defining your pools and defining your lanes. Next, we're going to go to the start elements that are used within the BPMN toolbox. So 1.0, you can see the elements that we had, most importantly, the icons or glyphs that are used, the markers that are used for each one of the elements from 1.0 to 1.1. When we get to 2, you can see a lot changed, but the icons, glyphs, markers, and you'll hear me call them glyphs from web development thinking, please bear with me, did not change that much. So you have a timer, you signal, but you see some other elements that were added as we went into the start elements in BPMN2. We'll come back to the properties after we get through the elements. Let's go into gateway next. So in gateway, you can see between 1.0 and 1.1, the same amount of elements were added. You'll notice that the glyphs or markers that were used, so you got an exclusive OR, what I refer to as XOR, that or XOR, but XOR is what I normally say instead of all the syllables in exclusive OR, and OR changed to inclusive and parallel. So when we went from 1.1 to 2.0, you can see some other markers were added, and we'll dive down into these, and gateway elements that were added for your use in 2.0. When we move from gateway to immediate events, you can see 1.0, 1.1, 1.1, we added some other elements, but from 1.1 to 2.0, you can see the elements change just a bit. So your message looks the same, your timers look the same, error changed to, if we go down, there's no corresponding marker or glyph for error, so that went away. We see that we picked up escalation, we picked up or changed the way that compensation was handled, cancel. You see that there's no references there, it's not necessary, it's using properties and other BPMN definitions to define a cancel event in an intermediate event. And when we go through, we can see that conditionals, the same marker, link, multiple, and then let's scroll down to signal, remained the same. But when we're looking at, and we're going to use conditional, which was formerly rules, when we're looking at that, and we move from 1.1 to 2.0, the way that the properties are handled changed somewhat. We'll talk more about that when we get around to using these in real models. Next, we roll into end events. And so from 1.0, you can see what happened. We talked about in the previous session to 1.1. And then from BPMN 1.1 to 2, you can see that not a lot changed, again, mostly in the property. So link evolved away to something else. Escalation was added as an end event, which was very important as we moved into BPMN 2. Next, we're going to go into activities, and this is where a lot of changes took place. So from 1.1 to 2, we saw that none transitioned for the most part into abstract as an element. So service remained the same, but a glyph or icon was a marker for, if you will, for service was added. This made it much easier as from a readability perspective. The receive and the send changed to add the envelope. So receive is in, send is out. And you can see that's shown by the markers that are in here. This is in, clear, out, a darker color. Script added a script icon. User added a people icon. Manual added a hand or for manual icon. And reference evolved into other things, and business rule was added, which was also very important as we were moving to BPMN2. A very important add as we move into global tasks that wasn't available in BPMN1 or 1.1 was the notion of global tasks. And in this case, you can see that 5 for the most part were added. You can certainly define these and do a lot, which we'll get into as we get into examples and so on. But you can see the business rule and the icon or marker that was used, the hand for manual, the paper icon for script, the people icon for user, and then abstract, all right? So this gave you some flexibility in the beginning to say, hey, this is what this global task is. That's used across all of our modeling practices within our company or our modeling shop. As we move from global tasks to business process elements, you can see from 1.0 to 2, not much really changed. However, a lot of the properties changed or transformed between 1.1 and 2. So we'll get into these, dive deeper into them, and touch on the things that changed in BPN2 when we get to business process modeling examples. Next, let's roll into BPEL, or Business Process Modeling Execution Language, or Business Process Execution Language. So in 1.0 to 1.1, as talked about in the last session, in 1.1 is where BPEL was added. And then when we got into 2.0, not much really changed in the element that was added. However, again, properties which we'll get into when we start touching on BPEL. We won't spend a lot of time on BPEL, but we are going to concentrate on sub-processes, how those are formed, and what the markers mean within each usage of the sub-processes and types of sub-process that are in BPMN2. Next, let's jump back to activities. And these become very interesting when we get into sub-process activities or tasks that are here. So we'll start with the abstract task. And this is a modeling concept used to represent a task that's defined at a high level of abstraction. It does not have a specific implementation, detail, or behavior specified within the BPN diagram itself. So just like none, this is where we may start when we're just doing conceptual modeling. So I might use an abstract or a none starting or end or intermediate, even task. So you can always come back and we'll show you how to change as you further define a model from concept to something that's production or near production ready. Next, we're going to roll into a service task. A service task is a task that uses a web service, an automated application, or other kind of service in completing a task. When we get to the receive task, This is a task that's waiting for a message to arrive in order to continue. The task is completed once the message is received. This becomes very important as well when we get into BPEL for people, long-running processes where process is running and it stops and waits for something to be completed in another pool or participant, and then it can continue once it's been received. On the other hand, a send task is a task that represents that sends a message to another pool or participant. The task is completed once the message has been sent. When we get to the script task, this is a task that's executed by the business process engine. The task defines a script that the engine can interpret. When the task begins, the engine will execute that script. The task will be completed when the script is completed. Now we get to the user task. And a user task represents a human performer or participant who performs a task with the use of a software application. This will be very important when we get to BPEL for people. And user tasks should not be confused with manual tasks. They're very similar in nature, but the manual task is performed without the aid of any business process execution language or any application. Next, we get into business rule task. And this one became extremely important. It was added in BPMN too. It became very important when we got into artificial intelligence, machine learning, and tailoring outcomes based on data science. So the business rule task provides a mechanism for a process to provide input to a business rules engine and then obtain output provided by that rules engine to drive the objective of the business process. Now we get into global tasks. And global tasks, also known as global activities or global transactions, these are activities that are defined once and reused across multiple processes within the same BPMN diagram or across different BPM diagram. Unlike regular activities, which are specific to a particular process, global tasks are defined for reuse. They promote modularity and consistency by allowing the same task to be used in multiple processes without duplication. Now let's get into each one of these briefly. And not much changes as far as the definition. We just add or preface that these are global. So when we're looking at a business rule, a business or global business rule task provides a mechanism for global process to provide input to the business rules engine and then obtain output provided by that business rules engine. When we get into the global manual task, this is performed without any aid of business process execution or engine or application. When we get into script, a global script is executed by the business process engine and defines what the engine will interpret. When the task begins, the engine will execute the script. When we get into the global user task, this represents, just like in the previous, a human performer who performs a task with the use of a software application. And then finally, we get to the abstract or the global abstract class. And this represents a task that's defined just as the other tasks, abstract task, at a high level of abstraction and does not have a specific implementation detail or behavior specified in the BPMN diagram itself. So again, just like the other or abstract class or task, we basically use this as a global reference. Now, with global tasks, essentially, you may not define these in the beginning. You're going to start out with a concept model or models, and then you're going to find reuse across those models. And then you're going to say, hey, we want to reuse this task in all of these other process situations. And then you'll move them to a global namespace, folder, or package, and then version accordingly to be used across your project and other business process models. We'll get more into this as we get into actual diagrams And then we start building some models for usage and reusage across our projects. Next, we get into subprocess or processes. And BPMN 2 defined about 5 markers, if you will. These are the various icons that are used or glyphs within the subprocess, which has a plus sign. So you'll see a task or activity when it becomes a subprocess, the glyph being removed, and you can see that it is replaced with a plus sign within the element, meaning that there's a subprocess, or this is a subprocess, and could be have a composite diagram underneath it that further defines that process. Let's dive into each one of these and talk about them at a high level. So in this case, we start with a service task activity, and to change it to a subtask, you go to Task and Properties, Task Type, and you have a selection here of changing the type. So you might start at abstract and then come back, oh, this is a service. And then you're going to come in here and with the activity itself, the activity type, and you're going to change this to a subprocess. And you get the plus sign down here. Now, this happens to be for compensation, and you can see that within the activity that we have set is for equals true. Is for compensation equals true, right? And as soon as we do that, let me just go ahead and change this to false. You can see it's just a plus sign. We're going to come in and we're going to change this to true right here. And you can see we get the marker in here that this is a compensation and then the plus sign subtask. Now, the key points about these compensation subprocesses for handling things like error handling, undoing actions, specific logic that contains its own set of activities, which are designed to reverse or compensate the effects in a main process activity. Things like triggering a compensation event that might be used throughout the particular flow in dealing with sequential execution. When we get into a loop subprocess indicated by this loop marker within the subprocess, this marker indicates that the subprocess repeats itself. And we'll see some more of that when we get into examples. So the multi-instance subprocess indicates that a subprocess can run with other identical subprocesses simultaneously. And when we get into ad hoc, this represents a collection of tasks that exist solely for handling specific case or cases, right? So the ad hoc subprocess refers to a subprocess that allows more flexibility in its execution. And an ad hoc process is a type of subprocess where the activities within it can be executed in any order, all right? So it's ad hoc. Then you can imagine when we get to compensation and ad hoc subprocess, it's just the combination of the two definitions I just gave, right? So essentially the compensation is handling compensating actions, while the ad hoc is allowing for more flexibility in the execution, where the activities are executed in any order. All right, next we're going to get into the business process itself element in here. You can see that has the infinity marker in here, meaning that there is a model underneath it, a diagram, a composite diagram that represents this particular business process, whatever it is. And you simply are dragging and dropping this element right here into your model, and you're using it to represent potentially a string of business processes that allow the user, the modeler, the other stakeholders to see what's taking place within that process. Now we'll get more into these particular elements as we get into the next session, which is going to be part 4, starting with 1, and then part 5 is going to be dealing with 2. And you can skip 1 if you're interested, or not interested, I should say, in the BPMN 1 business process models. We'll just do very quick examples. But when we get to 2, we'll do a little bit more detailed. I'm not going to have any complex models, but we'll talk about BPMN. We'll also talk about BPEL. And you can see that when you drag a BPEL model in here, go ahead and double click on it, you get the same toolbox that's available within the business process models. It's just you're performing or representing the model as a business process execution language, all right? And as we get into talking about BPMN or BPEL engines, this will start to make more sense on when to use what within your delivery objectives. Before we wrap up, I want to talk about the BPMN or BPEL delivery roles that are in here. So these are the various roles. And again, these each could be individual actors within your team for delivery, or there could be just one or a couple of actors that are fulfilling all of these roles. So we all know what a project or a program manager is. They're working with the business analyst. And the business analyst gathers and analyzes the business requirements to ensure that the BPEL processes align with the organization's objectives and needs. The next we get into the process designers. And this is not in any particular order, but I'm just going to put them in an order as I'm talking, trying to go top to bottom, left to right. Right? So the business process designer is responsible for designing the BPEL process, including defining the sequence of activities, interactions with the external services, air handling, and process logic. While the BPEL developers, these are the programmers who implement the BPEL processes using a BPEL compliant development tools or tooling and platforms. They write the code to orchestrate services, handle message exchange, and manage process flow. The service developers, on the other hand, these are developers responsible for creating the web services and components that the BPEL processes interact with. These services could be internal components or external services provided by third parties. The system administrator, just like in any development shop, is responsible for managing the infrastructure where the BPEL processes are deployed, including configuration or configuring services or servers, monitoring performance, and ensuring availability, meeting the non-functional requirements and performance objectives. The integration specialist, this is an expert on integrating different systems and applications, responsible for configuring adapters, connectors, and middleware to facilitate communication between BPEL processes and other systems. You have the quality assurance and testers. These are the roles that verify that BPEL processes function correctly, handle exceptions appropriate to meet the specific requirements, just like any other tester for the most part. They conduct unit tests, integration testing, and end-to-end testing for the BPEL processes. When we get into BPEL for people processes, they get into human or acceptance testing, and so on. Then we get into deployment engineers, just like any software shop. They're responsible for deploying the code, deploying the BPEL process to production environments, ensuring smooth migration and minimal disruption in ongoing operations. Make sure we're not breaking anything else, right? So the support engineers, just like in any other code implementation, they provide the support and maintenance for deployed BPEL processes. They support troubleshooting issues and applying patches or updates and optimizing performance as needed. This role is very important, especially in your shop that's dealing with CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment. Because you're constantly updating your models, and you may have a push to deploy that's moving faster than your quality assurance processes normally in your other shops. But when you're getting into a low code, no code implementation, dealing with CI/CD, this role here is extremely important, right? So again, I'm not going to get into project management. They're just overseeing the planning, the coordination, and execution of the BPEL projects as they're being implemented. All right, that concludes this session. I hope it was helpful. Please leave comments down below, good or bad. Let us know what challenges you have when you're doing business process modeling and what questions you have, and we'll try to address those in the future session or sessions. In the next part, we're just going to talk about BPMN 1. We're going to do a show and tell, simple model. Don't want to spend a lot of time there. If you're not interested in BPMN 1, want to get in right into BPMN 2, you can wait for that session. All right, in the BPMN 2 show and tell, we're going to do some example modeling of using the elements that we talked about today at a high level to address your questions and concerns. So until the next time we talk, happy modeling.